All right, so welcome everybody to this very special event. We're very happy to have you all with us. Welcome back. I can see a lot of very familiar names to the Green Olive community, and welcome to any new faces as well. This event is co-hosted between two organizations, the Green Olive Collective and New Profile. My name is Alex. I'm the Vice President of the Green Olive Collective, so I'll talk a little bit about our organization and how this event will work before I introduce you to Jonathan and Noga, who are joining us from New Profile today. We're very lucky to be with them, two very special and inspiring activists in many ways. So for those of you who don't know Green Olive, we are an Israeli-Palestinian social cooperative. We also have international members, more than 400 of you spread all around the world. I can see a couple of members in the Zoom this morning, so welcome. Our membership is open to all if anybody would like to join us. And then here on the ground in Israel, Palestine, we are now 11 working partners, 5 Israelis, 5 Palestinians, plus myself. I'm originally from New Zealand. We set up this event especially for people in that part of the world. So, no mai haere mai, e te whānau, Aotearoa. And welcome to anyone down in Australia or similar places as well. And the work that Green Olive has been doing for the past 13 years revolves around educational, political, cultural tours. We give tours on both sides of the Green Line and also many other sort of side activities aimed at promoting democratic values and human rights for everybody living in this land. We believe the occupation needs to be ended to provide a just and secure future for everybody here. And since the pandemic began, we've launched a series of online virtual tours. If you haven't joined them all, we have now 9 different sessions, which we repeat at least once a month. And we also run lots of special events, one-off or two-off events, in this case, with partner organizations. Many of those events have been recorded and you can watch on YouTube. And we also have several events coming up in the near future, so you can subscribe to our mailing lists and join us for future events as well. All of those tours and events operate in similar enough ways. We try to keep the events to about 90 minutes. That's how long today's event is. And registration for all of these events is free. However, of course, there is obviously costs associated with producing these events. And because tourists really cannot enter Israel-Palestine at all right now, they've become really the only way that we are able to keep doing the work that we're doing. So at the end of today's tour and presentation, if you've enjoyed yourselves and you'd like to contribute something towards the cost of making it, I'll paste a link in the chat in the Zoom where you can contribute whatever you felt today's tour was worth. We really do appreciate your support and continued contributions. Today, that contribution is going to be split evenly between Green Olive and New Profile, and we also donate 10% of all our contributions from all of our tours to a charity called the Palestine Children's Relief Fund, which provides medical care for Palestinian kids, particularly in places like Gaza, where they really can't get it any other way. If you'd like to hear more about the work of the PCRF, we did an event with them just a few months ago, which is also on our YouTube channel, so you can see all about the great things that they're doing and the partnership that we have with them. That chat feature where I'll paste a few links is also where you can send any questions. The structure of today's event is that we're going to hear from Jonathan and Noga first, then we're going to take you on a virtual tour of the militarization of the Israeli public space, and then we'll have a question and answer session. So if you have questions at any point during the tour, please feel free to type them in the chat. And then for the last half hour or so, we'll curate a kind of Q&A session. Hopefully we can answer all of your questions, but apologies in advance. If we have more than we have time for, we will do our best. One more final word then about militarization. I'm going to blatantly steal this quote from another event which I attended earlier this week, but I found it very, very powerful when thinking about militarization in Israel. The quote was that militarization is the Zionist solution to anti-Semitism, which really stayed with me. And you think about how prevalent anti-Semitism tragically still is today. In many ways, I think that the Israeli state solution to this is this strongly militarized society. Obviously, we're going to be critiquing that today, but I just maybe wanted to throw that quote out there to begin. So that's enough talk from me as an introduction. First of all, I'm going to call on Jonathan from New Profile to introduce himself, and then Noga after that. So hi, Jonathan.
Hi everyone. Really nice to have you here, and cool, and very happy to see that there's interest in this topic. Yeah, I'm Jonathan. I'm an activist, mostly working on anti-militaristic, anti-occupation work, human rights, and I'm also a researcher in researching a lot about Israeli military export and arms export. And yeah, and I'm happy to be here and talk to you and yeah, accompany you in this tour.
Okay, hi, I'm Noga. I'm also one of the co-coordinators of the Education and Media Project in New Profile. I've been a part of New Profile ever since 2013. Yep, I'm well acquainted, and I'm very happy to be here. It's the second time we're doing this event, and it has been very lovely for the first time. So thank you for taking interest in our work. We thought that we might start by introducing New Profile, so that's what I'm gonna do now. So New Profile, it's a feminist anti-militarist movement. It was formed in 1998. Now the connection between feminism and resistance to militarism, it's not obvious, but the reason that this movement was feminist to begin with is that it started by two groups of women that studied together about the occupation and about militarism in Israeli society. And then they started this group together in a conference. And that's how it started, from two women's groups. Now, back in the 90s, there was still hope for peace in Israel. Right now, it's pretty, it's really rare in the political discourse within the Israeli Jewish people in Israel, unfortunately, to believe that there's going to be a solution to the conflict and to the occupation. But in the 90s, people believed it's going to happen with the Oslo agreements, and it was a dominant thing. And there were many other left-wing organizations that were formed around those years, and they put a lot of emphasis about coexistence, about building bridges between Jewish people and Arabic people. Now, New Profile does share those values. We do believe in coexistence independently, but what this group was focusing on was the violence within the Jewish Israeli society, the things inside the Jewish Israeli society that preserves the violence, that make it keep on going, that, why people choose to go to war, because it is a choice in a sense, given the fact that we are the stronger side. So militarism is a main answer to that question of why we keep on fighting. Militarism's definition is very large, but you can say that it's a wide range of processes that connects the military and other militarist institutions to the wide public. The involvement of military in the civilian life, in education, in politics, all those things are aspects of militarism. It creates a belief that we can solve problems using force, using military force. In Israel, we have a large military armed beyond defensive or objective needs. And many believe that it's the people's army, that the army has a role towards the general public to educate it, to unite it. Everybody go into the military and they become similar, they become a part of a larger group. It's something that gives meaning to people's lives, according to the general belief, according to the mainstream belief, according to the myth. While actually we can say that the truth is that less than 50% of the people actually attend the military. So it's not even a majority army, but there is this illusion, which is a part of Israeli militarism. Yes, and New Profile also believes that this militarism is masculine. The main character that it puts in the center is the character of the male warrior. The combat warrior is a man, and having militarist institutions puts this man in the center. And we also think that it harms the stance of women in society at large. And yes, this is another reason why we connect it with feminism. All of us in New Profile are feminists, and most of us are also women. Yeah. So now, what do we do about it? The main thing that New Profile is doing ever since its first days is the counseling network. The counseling network, it's a network of volunteers If someone wants to get a military exemption, there is a general draft law in Israel, then they can contact us and then we can help them, we can assist them. Jonathan, you wanted to talk a little bit about it, right?
Yeah, I think I put it in context into the refusal and the obligatory draft. So just to take a few steps back, there are many aspects of militarization like you will see today, and we will go through some of them. We will just touch them, but still. But it all at the end culminates in the official military service and in the participation in other military and security frameworks. And that's what New Profile is focusing on in this one aspect of the counseling network. In Israel, the link between military service and citizenship is really tight and meaningful. And that's also because of the occupation and the ongoing conflict, and also because of civilian militarism. That's what we're talking about today also. And the army, like Noga said, is conceived as a people's army, and that serves somehow a universalist egalitarian ideology. But we in New Profiles show and research and work about that it's not really an universalist and egalitarian system. Okay, that the men and women are serving in the army since 1948. And we will show also like this gender perspective, or in New Profile working a lot about this gender perspective of the compulsory conscription. And it's also important to say that the army and the ideology here is glorifying the military all the time. It's glorifying military heroes and past victories. And it fosters values as courage and volunteering for a greater good for the state. But it also forces, of course, the sanctification of death and the justification of killing. And beside of that, like Noga said, Jewish Israelis are obliged to go to the army, except Orthodox Jews that we will not touch today, and also, of course, the Palestinians inside the 48 borders. It means inside the Palestinians with Israeli citizenship are excluded from military service. Still, from the Jewish citizens that are obliged to go to the military, just a half are doing it at the end, and from this half, another percentage is leaving the army before the end. And there are a lot of reasons for this. Like there's a phenomenon of not serving, of refusing to serve, and there are a lot of reasons. And New Profile, I think, works on looking into all reasons. All reasons are political for us. If it's an economic reason for a young man not to serve, if it's a political, if it's a religious one, if it's a medical reason, of course. And a lot of them are refusing to join an oppressive, of course, chauvinistic and violent system. But also a lot are seeing it's a burden for them. Of course, it's an asset for a few, but it's a burden for most of the soldiers. And it's a complicated issue, but we see a New Profile. We see a lot of importance in supporting those that just that don't want to participate in such a system. And yeah, if you want to say something more about the counseling network or the education program, Noga?
Yeah. So most people who don't want to go to the military service do it because of personal reasons, and we support all of them also because we see a meaning, a political meaning in this mass movement of people that don't want to take part. You know, they're voting by their feet. This is how we see it in New Profile, and there's also, as feminists, we see a tight connection between personal choices and politics generally. So you can say that as well. And about the counseling network, basically, it's illegal in Israel to encourage people not to go to the military because, you know, they don't want us to do that. So we don't do that. But if someone already chose to get a military exemption, whether it's before their draft or during their service, then they can approach the counseling network, and we help them. There are volunteers that assist them, usually via WhatsApp. There are many people that approach us every year, and we can say about this support that it's first and foremost a moral support. It might be very difficult in Israel to make this choice and to carry it through. Many people don't even know about the option not to go to the military. Many people from certain populations don't know anyone who didn't do it. So having this option to call someone and to get the support can be very significant. And another really cool thing that happens is that it's sort of a cycle. Like if someone calls me and I'm a volunteer in the counseling network, and he tells me about this new problem that he had with an officer or with a mental health officer or something, and then I can learn from his experience, and I can tell the network of volunteers about the detail, not about the person, obviously, because it's totally anonymous. And then you can learn from this, from the counseling process, you can learn how to help other people. So we have this cycle that we get information about the military through the experience of the people that we help. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, and we also provide legal aid for deserters. We have a legal aid, the counseling network has a legal aid coordinator, and it supports people who got into military prison. You should take in mind that Israel is a very layered society. There are many different groups. There are immigrants. There are people that have many different struggles with bureaucracy and with the language and just dealing with those stuff, you know, with big systems. So this help is also, it contains it as well. You know, some people are, you know, they need this support. So that kind of legal support is something we provide as well. In the past, we also campaigned for public refusers who wanted to resist the occupation in a public act of refusal, but we decided to stop doing it in order to focus on the masses of people who need our help. But there are other organizations that do it these days. Yeah. So, but what Jonathan and I are doing is not the counseling network. We are in charge of the education and the media, which is a project that is still in process. We're still building it. Jonathan can talk a little about what we're doing these days.
Yeah, so thank you, Noga. And yeah, the education network, the education program is trying to bring anti-militaristic discourse into the mainstream or into the Israeli society. And we're trying, in the past, we worked with a lot of youngsters and teenagers. Now we're focusing actually more on educational workers, so with teachers, but also in informal education systems. And we try just to, there are a lot of people that are interested in and that are curious, that are asking questions, that somehow they see something and they don't know how to name it or how to, like they don't know what is actually the problem there. And I think we're doing a lot of work also doing like through events, through Zoom events, through screenings, of course through media, and also approaching young people. But now we're actually having a seminar for like a ongoing seminar for educational workers with experts in different topics, because militarism is so wide. It's in media and it's in education, and it has a psychological effects, and it has effects on gender, and we're going through all those aspects of militarization processes with a lot of educational workers. So it's actually our focus now in the last year. Yeah, and in the future we will continue also to go out there to talk more with youngsters, to go more in media. We want just to put it out there, this topic. Yeah, and I hope I didn't forget something now.
Yeah, basically we try to meet as many people as we can these days and to build our network, and it's very exciting. Yep. So we'll also talk a little bit more about, we want to have a lot of time for the tour, but during the tour we'll also refer what are the aspects of militarism in education in Israel at large. So wait up for that. And just before we go to the tour, we wanted to give credit for the name. The name Mili-tourism, we didn't invent it. It was coined by a group of Turkish activists who had really cool festivals. You can read about them online. I will write it in the chat. So yes, they had these really cool events that included protests and entertainment and tours where they looked at militarism in Turkey. And it was in between 2004 and 2006. Very anarchist, very cool group of Turkish feminists. Their name, I think I just won't try to pronounce it, but I will write it in the chat because I really don't know how. So let's go to the tour.
Great.
Thank you for being here again.
Thanks, Noga, and thanks, Jonathan. So yeah, as they said, there's many different places and ways which militarism makes its appearance. And today on our tour, we're going to be exploring specifically how it appears in space, in the public space. And then I will kind of lead this tour from a Green Olive point of view, and Jonathan and Noga will jump in and provide us a bit more context about some of those specific aspects which they touched on already. So I think in this group, probably many of you have already visited Israel-Palestine physically. Maybe you've already come on a tour with Green Olive, which is great. We'd love to have you back again soon, we hope. And I think that for many people who visit, for example, the West Bank, this kind of militarized space is in many ways expected. You know, you're used to the idea that you'll see military bases and checkpoints and walls there. But today's tour is really going to focus on, as Jonathan said, the 48 borders of Israel. So the borders which Israel considers to be completely without question or controversy. And we're going to start today's tour somewhere where I would suspect most of you wouldn't anticipate seeing such heavy militarization. We're going to go to the beach, something which many tourists do. We're on the beach here, just a little bit south of Tel Aviv. As this picture loads, you can see some of the towers in the distance. That's already the south of Tel Aviv. There's an uninterrupted coastline all the way up there with beautiful sandy beaches. This is a town called Rishon LeZion. You can see people sunbathing here. This could be taken today. It's a beautiful morning in Rishon LeZion today. But as we turn around here, you can see looming over the top this big sand dune and a big military watchtower. Now this is the beginning of a huge military base. If I turn even further here to the right, you can see the beach abruptly comes to an end here with a huge fence. And on the other side of this beach is the big military base called Palmachim. Palmachim, I'll go to the next slide just to show you how big it is a base with Army, Navy, Air Force. This is also the main headquarters of the drones, which were used very widespread in the recent conflict, the recent war in Gaza, among other times. So you can see to the north of this view, the town of Rishon LeZion. As I said, very soon you'd see Tel Aviv. But as we zoom out, you can see these sand dunes. This is all part of the military base. Goes all the way down for nearly 50 kilometers with just one public road going through the middle of it to a small kibbutz and a big nature reserve. But all of this empty space down here is used for army trainings. Here you can see a couple of runways used by the Air Force Base. And this base continues all the way down to the civilian port of Ashdod. Another place that you might not expect to see such a kind of dominant military presence is in the middle of Tel Aviv itself. Tel Aviv is a big city. It's a city with very high rental prices and real estate prices. And yet, right in the middle of the city center, there is a huge military base called the Kiryat. It's like the IDF, the Israeli Army military headquarters, effectively. You can see the big kind of communications tower here, their main building. We're in the very heart of Tel Aviv. If we look over here to the left, you can see some very important historic buildings. This neighborhood is called Sarona, was built by German Christians known as the Templars in the end of the 1800s, so a very historic neighborhood. In fact, the Kiryat took some of these buildings to be part of their base. They moved physically some of the buildings as they rearranged the area. You can continue looking further to the left and you can see some big modern skyscrapers. This is much more the typical things that you would see in this neighborhood. And yet here we have the Kiryat dominating a huge piece of land. The Kiryat is the size of 40 football fields, just to give you an idea. One of the bases inside belongs to Matkal, which is a very elite army unit. Their base was estimated to be worth 17 billion shekels, just in terms of the real estate, with the potential to buy 3,000 luxury apartments. To be fair, the Israeli army is undergoing a process of moving as much as they can out into the peripheral areas. And already 27 dunams in this base have been allocated for public construction in the next few years. You also see the soldiers from the Kiryat in the streets of Tel Aviv. And this is true across Israel. It's very common to see both both uniformed and ununiformed Israelis carrying their military weapons with them, like you can see in this picture. And what we're going to do in the next part of our tour is jump on public transport. Maybe some of you have ridden a bus or a train in Israel, and especially on like a Sunday morning, which is the beginning of the working week in Israel, you will see public transportation basically operating as troop transports as soldiers return to base after their weekends. So we're going to jump on the bus, and Jonathan is going to take us for a tour now. We'll see if there's any soldiers on the ride with us.
If we take the train, and just important for me to say, the weapons, it's actually a huge thing that we need to talk about. A new prophet is talking about the weapons in public space. Like you've seen as pictures, a lot of ununiformed, mostly men, are going with huge rifles in the public space. And actually, it's researched and already known that the weapons, the licensed weapons that are being taken home, are actually the cause for a lot of killings of women by their partners or by men they know. From 2000, 117 women were killed by men they knew. Because of licensed weapon, that means soldiers that took their weapon home, or security guards or policemen. And there are right now 50,000 weapons in this moment out there belonging to soldiers or policemen. 50,000, like armed, small arms, like rifles and guns. So we're taking the train. We want to go out there. We want to go to the nature. We don't want to see rifles or buildings or bases. And we're going to the national trail. It's like a huge, long hiking trail from the north to the south of Israel. And we're going to the desert. We want to see a little bit the desert and sand. And we're walking on this trail. But then when we look to the right, we suddenly bump into a tank and actually another base. And I know we're showing you now bases. We wanted to start with really, really clear militaristic examples of in public space or in the space in Israel. So this tank, it's actually a base of a tank brigade. Actually, when we saw this walking this hike, we cannot walk to the right or to the left of it, because both sides are training areas. And actually 70%, first of all, the Negev desert, it's the southern half of Israel. It has a huge history, of course, also of Nakba. There are now still 30% of Bedouin Palestinians there in unrecognized villages, just to give you like the context of where we are. And 70% of this Negev desert is ruled and controlled by the army. So actually, us traveling there, we cannot walk almost anywhere, just in some spaces that are allowed. All the other spaces are full with heavy vehicles, with armed munition that is thrown by airplanes are bombing for training. Yeah. Also sometimes dangerous substances that are involved. And actually the army there in the Negev and also in the north is causing a huge, it's hurting the environment in a really, really bad way. Actually, quarter of all fires nature fires are caused by army training. And last year there was one of the biggest fires in the north of Israel caused by an army training. 1,500 dunam were burned. And it's a damage that nature researchers and environment researchers say that it will never restore itself in the nature there. So it's just like a small perspective on environment also, but of course also on this training areas that are, you see in this picture, inside agricultural fields and inside villages sometimes, mostly in Palestinian villages, and the army is going quite freely in and disturbing the civilian space of Palestinians. Like in this picture, they ruined a small house And that's the training. It's not an operation. It's really important to say we're just looking now on this daily life of the army, not in conflict, not in a war. That's a whole other story, of course. Yeah, and maybe you can go to the next slide to show just how much land actually is ruled by the Israeli army. And I know it's just one aspect, that it's like this aspect of territory and land, but it's important to show that like how hyper-militarized this space is in Israel. So this map shows actually only the training areas. So it's not all of the area that is owned by the military, but actually 40% of all land inside the 48 borders, of course. I'm not looking now in the West Bank. The West Bank is completely ruled by the Israeli army too, but I'm looking inside of the Israeli border. 40% is completely owned by the army, and another 40% are restricted or like are ruled in some way by the army. So 80% of the whole territory in Israel, the land, has somehow controlled by the military army. It's an interesting fact. And yeah, and now we're sad about this trip, and we want to go back home. So we're going to a town in the center of Israel. It's close to Tel Aviv. It's Ramat HaSharon. Ramat HaSharon is a really, really rich town. It's quite small. It's mostly Ashkenazi Jews. It's actually also, of course, placed on an old Palestinian village that was expelled in 1948 in the Nakba. The name was Abu Kishek. It had 2,000 Palestinian residents, and now it's a Jewish Israeli town. And we're walking in the street, and suddenly also when we cannot cross, there's a huge fence and a gate, and we think it's a base, but it's actually not a base. It's a factory. A highly secured factory with surveillance system, and it's actually the base or it's the factory of an Israeli arms company. It's one of the biggest arms companies in Israel. It's called Israeli Military Industry. It's also one of the oldest ones. 50 years the factory is in this place, in the middle of Israel. You can see that there the brown area that is not so, yeah, exactly that. What Alex shows us, and it was in 2018 sold to a private company called Elbit. Maybe some of you know it from out there, because it has a lot of it makes a lot of Israeli arms export also. It was sold to Elbit for $500 million, and it's the second biggest arms company in Israel and the biggest private arms company in Israel. Some of the arms companies are still belonging to the state, and it's actually interesting because the main customer is the Israeli army or the Israeli military, the Ministry of Defense, so also the police. Elbit is the company that market. I mean, it's also interesting to see that Elbit is producing about 85% of the drones used by the Israeli military. So the next picture, for example, is it's a different company, IAI, but it's really close to the one that Elbit is producing also. But 85% of the drones used by the Israeli are actually manufactured in this space we saw before, in this factory. And important to say here that Elbit and other companies are marketing it for the products. The products are used, of course, in the wars in Gaza, in the West Bank, and are after that marketed in the world as battle tested, yeah, and outstanding capabilities and operational experience. And they're even saying it in their booklets and in their commercial that it was battle proofed, and it had great experience in Gaza in the last war. And we're actually now doing a research also on the arms that were used in the last Gaza war in May, to also look and check how it will affect later the market of arms in the world. Israel is the 8th largest exporter of arms in the world, and it's general. It's not related to the population or something. It's in general the 8th largest exporter of the world. It's number 1 in exporting drones and in producing drones. And Israel is exporting to 130 countries all over the world. It's a crazy number. And it's also, it's connected with also what happened in last week. I don't know if a few of you saw the news about NSO, the Israeli cybersecurity company. It's a private company with the Pegasus project. And it's also connected deeply to this. The people in NSO and then also the cybersecurity industry, they're all ex-soldiers, officers from the intelligence units or computer units, making now a huge profit out of cyber attacks and surveillance and spying. And also in cybersecurity, where we have a huge, Israel has a huge market, it's selling it to dictatorships and to countries that are violating human rights without even checking, without caring, and making a profit out of, before that, trying it in the West Bank on Palestinians or trying it in Gaza. So it's deeply connected, like this whole cycle of arms and the militarization of, like the militarization and conflict. It makes huge profit and builds the cycle of profit also, and capitalism is connected to that too. Yeah, and we're going to a different, I mean, just to show a case and maybe to go back to the space where we've been in this factory. So this factory close by had another factory of IMI, Israeli Military Industry was the name of the company, and it actually exploded in '92. It's in the middle of Israel also, it's in Herzliya on the coast. 2 people were killed and 70 civilians that were living nearby were injured. It was 100 tons of explosives that exploded there. And it actually had a huge also damage for the grounds and for the water. Like this yellow stain is, the photo is from 2018, and it shows a yellow stain of some substance of like poisoned materials that got out there in this explosion. And till a few years you could not get into the water there because it allowed. So it shows also again like this effect on environment. All the water wells are affected there and poisoned. And again, also this factory and this place where you saw the water, it was also, of course, till 48 in a Palestinian village called Al-Haram. 600 people were living there. And I think it's always important to show, and we will talk about it later also in Jaffa, to show this connection. It's starting in 48, this crazy military bases where, or factories, arms factories were built on ruins of Palestinian villages, and today are continuing to arm and to provide violence and weapons for the occupation for different wars. That's it for now. Now we will go to different spaces that are more that are affecting actually more like the collective identity of Israel and this militaristic identity. And Noga, you can take from here.
Yes, so now we continue our tour in Israel. We're sick of seeing fences. We just want to walk around in the park, you know. We want to be in Petach Tikva. Petach Tikva is a nice place. It's the first moshava, first colony, you know. So we walk around in the park. Just you want to enjoy, I don't know, is this a museum? Ah, wow. Looking around, nice area. Okay, there's a flag. Oh my God, that's a tank. And not only is it a tank, if you really want to enjoy it, you can climb it. Although now there's a fence, but yeah, but you can see in this picture a little girl standing on that same tank. Now, yeah, that's a family picture. It's sort of innocent, but it is interesting to see in Israel that kids are militarized as well. They're getting used to military symbols. So as we said earlier, there is a general draft law in Israel, but that's definitely not the first thing that is being done in order to make young people get used to the idea that they must serve in the military. Just now I'm going to talk a little bit about education in Israel and about how people are being prepared mentally to get into military service and to, you know, live in peace beside those military systems. So you should note that there are different education systems for Jewish and Arabic people in Israel. It's not the same. And we're going to talk about mainly Israeli Jewish system. Now, there are also religious places and non-religious places, and there are many differences between the involvement of military in different places, but in the general public curriculum, militarism is very present from a very young age in many stories, pictures, holidays, activities for children, even such activities, you know, fun days, going out, making gifts for soldiers. They can have like a little gift wrapped with a little, you know, note for a soldier. Sometimes they encourage them since kindergartens to do those things. And there are many stories in Jewish and Zionist history about the battles of the few against the many, about the many enemies that we had during the years that came to kill us and how we had to defend ourselves. And those stories are being told again and again and again. There's a great emphasis about fear, about nationalism. This is, I believe these are settlers, you know, that they expose kids for guns from a very young age. There are certain places in Israel where there's more emphasis on this. It's a radical example, but it does exist in Israel in many different you know, quantities. Some kids are more militarized, some are less. But it does start from a very young age. We can go to the next picture. Maybe. That's another example of just exposing kids to weapons from a very young age. This is, here you can see a soldier from the Nachal. Nachal, it's like one of the big battalions in the military, and many of the women there, and also the men, but mainly women, are part of the education corps. And the education corps are a part of, you know, it's not obvious that the Israeli military has an education section, that they meet children, that they go and help them, you know, maybe in after school activities, and maybe to help them with homeworks. And sometimes they're present in school, sometimes they can come and give activities, sometimes they come and encourage kids to go to the military, because it really builds up. And in the height of it is in the high school years. I think that now we can go to the next picture. In the high school years, it culminates. There's a cooperation between the military and the education system, both in schools and in after-school education frameworks. Each local authority has a unit that is in charge of this connection. Every year, they plan the activities to prepare youth for their draft. At this point, they are between the ages 15 and 17, just from the 9th grade to the 12th grade. Every year, they have some activities to prepare them for their draft, and they're still minors. So it's really annoying. In the common Israeli mindset, going from high school to the military is like going from elementary school to middle school, but the shift might be a little more violent. So some military people come to the school to tell the students about the draft process. Sometimes they take them for a field day in a battle area. You know, they tell them about the history, how they did. That's another example of a ceremony. Yeah, and the height of it is in the last year of high school. That's when they take the kids for a week-long activity in a military base. You know, it's made for this purpose, that they get the experience of combat training, you know, of basic training. They wear uniforms, they learn how to shoot rifles, they get yelled at, you know, as if they're soldiers. They have this like activity that simulates being a part of the military, and they're doing it to prepare them, but they obviously also doing it in order to, you know, have them have a shared experience as a group that unites them around this thing of the military, around being a part of this culture. And yeah, they're maybe 17 or 18 at this point. But it's one of the activities that the Israeli education system offers. So it's also something that we should have in mind when we think about what creates this mindset and the belief that the military is just and the war is necessary. And the next thing, it also has a lot to do with education. Now we want to continue our tour. We walk around.
And I'll pick up here. Thanks.
Yeah, Alex.
Noga. So as Noga said, we've continued our tour. We're now a bit further south in a kibbutz, a collective farm called Yad Mordechai. Yad Mordechai is quite close to the borderline between Israel and Gaza, only about 1 kilometer away. As I zoom out here from Yad Mordechai, you'll quite soon see the beginning of the Gaza Strip, just here. And Yad Mordechai was the site of a very famous and important battle in 1948. Right, 1948 is a super important war in the history of Israel. It breaks out just after the end of the British mandate for Palestine, which ended in May of 1948. And the very next day, we had armies from surrounding Arab countries coming into what's now Israel, Israeli Jewish paramilitary groups usually. This was before the official foundation of the Israeli army, engaged them in battle. And here in this area, we have an Egyptian army marching north from Egypt through what's now Gaza. And one of their first major engagements with the Jewish forces was in this small kibbutz of Yad Mordechai. And just like Noga was saying before about how many examples there are in this kind of mythology of the few against the many, this is a great example. There was only about 100 kibbutznikim, people of the kibbutz, supported by 20 or so people from the Palmach, a pre-military, militarized group. And they managed to hold off the entire Egyptian army for nearly a week. They sustained about 24 losses, but 300 or 400 Egyptians were killed. And today they've kind of reenacted this battle site, recreated it. So you still have trenches there. They have old, unusable, but still real rifles set up for people to put their hands on. And then sort of coming out of the scrub, you have these like shadowy black cutout figures of Egyptian troops. Now this is also, of course, it's kind of very visceral. It's almost a bit pornographic, if you ask me, but also in the context of what's going on in the south of Israel and Gaza today. Right? There have been cases of people from Gaza crossing the very difficult to cross, but there have been cases of people doing that. And so for people living in these kibbutzim, the idea that you are facing a sort of shadowy enemy from Gaza is still very much part of the discourse. This fear is constantly being repeated. And today tourists can go there, walk through the trenches and literally put their hands on these weapons pointed at these soldiers. You can see here tourists posing with some of the old tanks and that kind of thing. And ultimately this was a very important battle because it slowed the Egyptian march north so much that reinforcements were able to come, and the Egyptian army never was able to join up with the Jordanian one, and they never made it all the way to Tel Aviv. So, you know, in the story of the founding of the country of Israel, super important battle. And even the name of the kibbutz itself is quite important and quite symbolic. And maybe Noga, you want to pick up here. This is the center of Yad Mordechai.
Yeah, so thank you, Alex. So the name Yad Mordechai is the kibbutz Yad Mordechai. It was actually named after Mordechai Anilevich. And Mordechai Anilevich was the leader of the ghetto Warsaw ghetto uprising in the Holocaust. That was a story about a bunch of youth movements, young people who wanted to resist the Nazis, who wanted to resist you know, what was going on. They were in the ghetto. They didn't want to die as victims. They wanted to resist this situation. And they chose to get guns and to have this uprisal. They knew that they were going to die, but they knew they were going to die anyway, according to the story. But this is a story that is very important to understand in order to see what is the what is the way that people in Israel perceive memorial culture. Because we have the Holocaust Remembrance Day, and the Holocaust Remembrance Day was actually chosen, the date was chosen after the Warsaw Ghetto Uprisal, in order to remember the Holocaust and the heroism. That used to be the name, the Holocaust and the Heroism Day, you know, Shoah v'Gvura. It's not just about the victims of the Holocaust, it's also about the heroes that fought. That was like an emphasis in the first day of the country. The mindset did change since then, but that was the emphasis back then. But just imagine, it's not just a Memorial Day. I mean, we have a lot of ceremonies around those Memorial Days, and it takes place in schools. Here you can see a bunch of kids, they stand in a row, all of them wearing white, and they read those stories. And just imagine what it's doing to a mindset of a child ever since kindergarten until the 12th grade, and then also in the army years and sometimes later in life. Year after year, we have those ceremonies to remember being the victims of a genocide, which is obviously something very important in our history. But the thing is that it is connected in a wider narrative to another Memorial Day. Maybe we'll go to the next. This is also in high school. You can see those symbols of the Holocaust, you know, the way that they used to mark Jews. Just a week after the Holocaust Memorial Day, there's the Memorial Day for the fallen soldiers. Okay, so basically it goes every year that way. There's the Passover, which is, you know, they talk about ancient times, the Seder, they read the Agadah, they read the story about the Hebrew slaves that left Egypt. A week after that, there's the Holocaust Memorial Day. And the week after that, there's the Soldiers' Remembrance Day. And just the day after, they get the Independence Day. So there's this narrative about being victims and finding freedom, you know, about being slaves and getting free, and then being the victims of a genocide, getting a military, which is a big part of the national story in Israel, and then having country. So this story is something that it's embedded very deeply in our mindset, in our national mindset here in Israel, and that's also a part of militarism. You can also note, if you see the texts, the poems, the songs in the Holocaust Memorial Day, in front of those same texts in the Fallen Soldiers Remembrance Day, that the death is depicted very differently. In the Holocaust stories, there's a grotesque way to show it. They show death as something very sad. Well, there is something pure and heroic about the death of the soldiers. And it's really sad to see, for me at least. It was always weird for me also as a student to see the way that, you know, there's a way to glorify death, because they still expect little kids, not little kids, but they still expect young people to go to the military, given that price that is to be paid for the war. So
thanks, Nola.
just we also have another site, right, about the memorial. Yeah, so there are also a lot of memorial sites in space. Now we just drive by, right? What road is it, Alex?
This is road 50, is that correct? Anyway, we're in the center of Israel.
Yeah, we're back in the tour. We're going around. And here we see this huge memorial site. Yeah, you can see, basically it's a stairway going up to heaven. And this memorial site is, it's in Bet Lid Junction. And that's where in 1995, during the Oslo agreements, a little before, during this time, there was this huge terror attack, double terror attack in that junction, where 21 soldiers and 1 civilian were killed. Basically, there was a suicide attack where there were a lot of injured people, and then some military men rushed there to help the injured people, and then there was another attack and some more people died. And the artist that built this site lived really nearby in Kfar Yona. And yeah, you can see, first of all, it's a giant, it has a really big presence in space. And you should understand that mindset. You should understand the fear of Israeli people. Sometimes, you know, in our side of the political discourse, we tend to forget that there's actual fear also for the occupiers, also for Israelis. And that's one thing that, you know, it gives its presence in space. But this huge thing, it's also underground. There are 22 halls to remember the fallen, so the fallen people. And it's interesting to see, you know, how many resources and how much money goes into these memorial sites. The artists who planned it, most of her arts are like Judaica things, or like smaller things. And this is like a really big project that she was able to build up because there's such a big support for memorial sites of war victims. So yeah, so that's another evidence in space for this memorial culture.
Great. So for our final little section of the tour, we do obviously want to have time for your questions after this. But so far, we've really focused exclusively on how this militarization of space affects the Jewish Israeli majority. But what about other minority groups? So now we're zooming into Jaffa, which is still today predominantly Arab. It was before the founding of the State of Israel, kind of the cultural capital of Palestine. Today, Jaffa is officially part of the city of Tel Aviv. This house is colloquially known as the Green House. It was built in 1934 by a wealthy citrus merchant. He owned, as many people did in these times, huge orange and lemon plantations. It's this big mansion in a very important part of the suburb of Ajami. This is a very big junction, so it kind of overlooks 2 or 3 major streets. But in 1948, the city of Jaffa was depopulated as part of an ethnic cleansing across historic Palestine. Over 400 villages and towns were depopulated at this time, and much of the property of these 750,000 refugees was seized. This house was seized by the IDF and became a military court. So it's a very kind of dominant building overlooking the whole neighborhood, still where mostly you have Palestinian citizens of Israel living, housing this kind of symbol of a very oppressive state apparatus. Next door, you can see the main entrance to the adjoining military base. So people living in this neighborhood see soldiers in uniform and weapons every single day. This is also a street with several schools on it, so you have lots of kids passing. There's a school just back here. And this is an army which these Arab school students, as Noga and Jonathan said, don't join, right? They're not joining the Israeli army by and large. And you also need to remember that most of the Arab residents of Jaffa have got family in places like Gaza. This is where most of the refugees ended up. So the connection there, I think, for them is very personal, and they experience this militarization of space in a very, very different way. From here, we're going to go to Jerusalem, and this is where we're going to be winding our tour up. I suspect that many of you in the Zoom today will have made this journey from Tel Aviv or Jaffa through the hills to Jerusalem. Maybe you came by bus or by train. Either way, you will have got off in the same part of West Jerusalem. That's the Jewish side of Jerusalem. Maybe then you jumped on the tram or the light rail, which you can see running through here. Just 2 stops away from the central station, you come to the stop called Vitka. The name of this square is the Vitka Square. Maybe you asked yourselves what Vitka means, maybe you didn't. But if we turn around to the right here, you can see the reason the square is called this way. The Vitka is a weapon. The square was named after this piece of light artillery. This was actually invented in the 1948 war. You can see here the projectile sticking out of the barrel. So only a small part of the projectile is actually inside the barrel. This makes the weapon very inaccurate, and as far as I can tell from reading different histories, not a very useful weapon in the war. What it was very useful for, though, was creating a sense of fear, because the Vitka, although it was inaccurate, was very, very loud. In fact, only 6 of these things were ever made. 2 of them are on public display. They have a huge kind of role in the kind of psyche of this war. So you could set up one of these things in 1948 outside a Palestinian town or village, and with a couple of these huge explosions, many times the villagers would flee in fear, assuming they were under attack by much larger pieces of artillery. And the fact that, again, we're naming this square after this weapon, I think is I mean, the symbolism is pretty obvious. And if we wanted to carry on, we could jump back on the light rail, and just another few minutes down the line, we would come to the old city of Jerusalem, to the Great Walls, the closest gate to the old city. The stop on the light rail is outside the Damascus Gate. Damascus Gate, I think, is the most beautiful gate, and it's also the main gate for use by Palestinians in East Jerusalem. We won't go into too much detail about the important differences between the different peoples here, but suffice it to say that the vast majority of East Jerusalem Palestinians are not citizens, which is a very important distinction to remember. And if they were coming to pray in Al-Aqsa Mosque or visit other important sites in the old city, many tens of thousands every day will enter through the Damascus Gate, making it a real kind of bottleneck. This picture is actually already a couple of years old, but here you can already see, as we turn around, the influence of surveillance. You can see a surveillance watchtower here, another one on the right-hand side, but this surveillance has definitely beefed up in the coming years. And Jonathan is going to take us through to the end of our tour now, talk a bit about surveillance and profiling before we go to our question and answers.
Exactly. So we will walk now slowly towards the center of the old city. But yeah, you mentioned surveillance, and it's important to say that this whole neighborhood, East Jerusalem, generally is highly surveilled. All the neighborhood is full with cameras, facial recognition systems. Actually, I can send you also a name of a company, Anyvision, an Israeli company that is making really problematic technologies, and is working in the West Bank and in Palestinian villages and checkpoints, military checkpoints. And yeah, East Jerusalem, I am sure that you heard about Sheikh Jarrah, that is now in a lot in the discourse, and Silwan. It's all 10 meters from this gate here. And this gate changed in the last years, like Alex said. Now there are police posts. You can see it on the right. There are 3 police posts where Palestinians are investigated and checked. So police is just taking people that want to enter the old city or walking there or sitting there, and is getting them into the post. Sometimes they're beating them up there. Sometimes they just body check them. Of course, everything out there is filmed and recorded. Here you see someone is taken by force. There's actually now a video that went viral of a man that was beaten up inside his post, and some camera from outside got it, because you cannot see inside you cannot see well inside this post. So it's a hyper militarized presence there, and it's a space that every Palestinian, like for us as tourists, now we're tourists that is walking towards the old city, we will have not a problem. We will not see it. If we won't know it, we won't see it. We will not be checked. We will see soldiers, but they will not talk with us. And I think for Palestinian walking there, they're always in fear. I did a project once recording those policemen there and the Palestinians walking, and the police was questioning me after 2 minutes, and it was really problematic for them that I'm filming them, because they knew that they're doing something wrong. And yeah, Palestinian is just, it's always a fear to walk there and being checked and being, I don't know, maybe arrested. We continue to walk inside into the old town, inside the Muslim quarter. And I'm sure that you know, or some of you know this place, maybe if you've been there. It's the Austrian Hospice. It's a beautiful space to relax, to maybe also, it has beautiful accommodation also, and a rooftop where you can see beautiful landscape of the old city. And yeah, it's a nice space. You can see the small cameras that we talked about, the surveillance, and of course the military presence. In every corner you see border police. And it's also interesting because border police is actually soldiers. It's obligatory Israeli army service, but they are part of the police. They're like in a cooperation with the police and doing police work. They're also doing police work inside Israel borders, but also outside, also in Palestinian villages and in the West Bank, you see, and in the Old City. And actually, yeah, for some, it's a nice and fun. You can see here a tourist doing a group photo with the soldiers. For some, militarization is interesting, is I don't know, exotic. But for Palestinians that is walking there, it's a nightmare. And actually, a young Palestinians, mostly it's young people, men and women. So the racial profiling is actually, and I'm sure that you know this term, racial profiling is happening there on a minute basis. So racial profiling is the act of suspecting or targeting a person of a certain race or ethnicity. It's on the basis of observed characteristics or behavior, rather than on individual suspicion. And actually, 100 meters from there, a young Palestinian disabled man was killed by a policeman. His name was Ziad al-Khalak, and he was shot in the, they ran after him. He was really afraid. He was an autistic guy. And it started with racial profiling, for the policeman, weird behavior that was suspicion for them, and every Palestinian man that is somehow acting a little bit different or is looking in a certain way for the policeman is for them a suspect or is a danger. Here you see police body checks are happening there in every corner, and it's crazy because if you start to notice it, you see it everywhere. Also, as for me, that I'm not checked. You know, I'm a Jewish Israeli white man. I'm the most privileged person walking there, and the police will never talk with me. But I'm trying to film. I'm trying to intervene when I see stuff like that, and you cannot not notice it in the moment that you start talking about it or start to work on stuff like that, and care, and. Actually, also an important thing to say that racial profiling, it's not an Israeli invention, but Israel took it to another level. They really studied it. They're practicing it. They're actually exporting this method to the world, to Europe, and to the States. 3 or 4 units of Ferguson police units. It's where Michael Brown was killed by a white policeman. 3 of the 4 units were trained by Israeli police before 2014, before it happened. So it's just interesting, like there's huge police exchange or police training exchange, and racial profiling is one of the methods that are learned by other police. A nice report of an organization, it's called Deadly Exchange. It's checking where the exchange of police between the states and Israel is happening and how much. I think it was more than 1,000 police exchanges in the last years. I can send you the link later. And yeah, and then we arrived at the final spot. It's the Western Wall, the Kotel in Hebrew, and it's right under the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Before we start, it's important to say that it was not this space, this white, empty space was not empty before for 67 actually, not 48, 67. Till 67, there was a Palestinian neighborhood there called the Mugrabi neighborhood. It was completely destroyed. In 67, completely erased, and of course, all memory. We have pictures in the internet and in some books, but Israel loves to erase it also from the narrative and from the visual memory of Israelis and of course also Palestinian. And now it's the famous spot also for ceremonies. So the military is actually doing all of it. Oath all of its oath ceremonies where a soldier is taking oaths to protect the country and to protect the army with his life and her life, also women. And the oath is taken, of course, on a Bible. So it's also like interesting to see the connection between religion, not only to be in this space. It is highly. It's a holy space, not only in religious reasons, but also from Zionist reasons now. So this connection between Zionism, nationalism, and religion is all culminating in the space of the Kotel, of the Western Wall. Important to say that the Muslims, there are a few Muslims that are serving in the army. They're doing those on the Quran, and Christians on the New Testament. but still, like this connection between army and sacrificing yourself and yeah, being loyal to the state is completely connected also to religion, and that's also really problematic in our mind. And yeah, I think that's it. I think we wanted to end there. It's not maybe, yeah, here all again the soldiers with weapons and the Bible, the great symbol. Yeah, so this use of religious symbols, and I think this connection between citizenship, loyalty to the state, Zionism, and of course religion. In the last years, it's getting really, really stronger, this connection to religion and territory, and it's all, yeah, it's all combined with militaristic processes that are happening. I think we wanted to show you a few aspects. There are a lot of many more aspects of militarization processes in Israel. We just wanted to show some of them that are also connected to space, to civil space. And of course, it's a whole different thing in the West Bank. And we decided not to go into the militarization of space in the West Bank and in the occupied territories or in Gaza or at the borders. Actually, also the borders are really, really interesting. The fences and walls that are happening, the apartheid wall that was built. We try to stay inside more civil spaces that are in daily life, or that the tourist will really walk through when he or she is in Israel. Thank you for going to this tour.
Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you, Noga. Really, both of you added so much, and I'm really glad that we were able to do this tour together. But this is not the end of the event, because we still have time for your questions. And in many ways, this is the best part of the event. If anything was unclear or you'd like to engage with Jonathan and Noga on some of these issues in a bit more detail, now is the time. We didn't actually have so many questions come through today. So we were able to make the tour a little bit longer. We still do have at least 20 minutes for questions. What I'll do is I'll invite people to ask the questions aloud. If you prefer to have me ask them for you, that's totally fine. But the first person I will ask, if you'd like to ask the question aloud, comes from Bruno. So Bruno, if you'd like to ask a question aloud, you're invited to do so. Are you there, Bruno?
Hello, from New Zealand, in fact. I wondered if Jonathan and Noga could generalize about attitudes to compulsory military service. Is it accepted? Is it opposed? Popular? Unpopular? Is it even an issue? And I wondered whether veterans receive privileges and discounts for life, as they do in the US, as a reward for their service.
So I'll take that.
I can complete your view.
So the last part of your question, just to understand, was whether if you serve in the military, whether you get privileges. That was the last part of the question?
Yeah, well, I mean, in America, they get travel discounts and all sorts, don't they, former soldiers. So that makes it more worth doing. Yeah.
So, okay, so here in Israel, the state expects everyone to enlist. So there are certain privileges like tax points and scholarships for school. And also there's like a nice grant that you get when you finish military service. If you do combat soldier, then you get a little more or a lot more, but there are those things, but they are proportionate to the fact that like most population is expected to do it. So it's not huge, it's not like you're the greatest hero, but so you won't get like crazy privileges, but there are those little things in Israel that if you serve in the military, you are rewarded for. And about not going to the military, so it's interesting. I think that in our daily lives, I live in Tel Aviv, Jonathan lives in Tel Aviv as well. Many of our friends didn't go to the military. In Tel Aviv specifically, in urban areas, in young areas, a lot of people don't really care. But there is a thing in the media, in the mainstream discourse, around politics, that sometimes people will shame public figures for not going to the military. There were a lot of celebrities in Israel let's say Bar Rafaeli, you know, she's like a famous top model that is Israeli. So when she was 19, she got married in order to get a military exemption, because if you are a woman and you get married, then you're not recruited. And there was a big fuss around her, around the fact that she chose not to go to the military. So there is like this very violent discourse. Just yesterday, I saw another one of the, like a former singer songwriter that he won this big contest like American Idol or something, and then he was shamed for not going to the military. So there is this thing, there is like a big fuss around people who don't go to the military very often. So you might pay a price for that if you're a public figure, and also it depends on how it meets other privileges that you have, you know, because some people go to the military with the expectation of it to help them mobilize. That's another myth that we have in Israeli militarism. Did I miss anything? You want to add anything, Jonathan?
No, maybe it's important
I hope
to say.
it's real clear. Yeah.
I think it's important to say maybe that there's still social differences and gaps that are reproduced by the army. It's a whole topic. We can make a whole session about the discrimination of Mizrahi of people of colors in the army, and lower class working people and families, and how the army is not empowering them and taking them out of this whole cycle, but it's actually deepening it. But I think it's a topic that it's too big now to enter in like one small answer.
Yeah, it's complex.
Great, thanks to you both, and thanks Bruno for a good question. Next, could we hear perhaps from Liz? Liz in the UK had a good question. Would you like to ask it aloud, Liz? I can also read it for you if you prefer not to. So Liz asked, are there still professions that are closed to those who refuse?
I cannot hear you, Alex.
Yeah, I didn't hear the last part of the question.
I apologize. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry, don't know what happened there. It was a question from Liz in the UK who asked if there are professions which are closed to those who refuse military service, medicine or law or something like this, perhaps.
So yeah, I think also Noga actually worked a lot about this, and we're trying a new profile also to point it out that officially it's not allowed to discriminate, to not give someone a job, to discriminate because of military service. And we still see, in one point, we see jobs that are open only for military ex-veterans in security industries or stuff like that, or security guards, or sometimes even like a waiter job is. People say we prefer veterans, like we prefer people that serve, but it's not allowed to discriminate and not give a job. But we see still sometimes people losing or not getting into a job interview, and not always it's explained why. And in a few interviews, it was proven that they asked actually about the military service in for example, in medicine applications. But we now try also to show that it's a myth. Like a lot of people, if someone wants to not serve, and all the families and the society is telling them, no, it will harm you after that, it will hurt you with getting a job, and it's actually not true. But in some cases it's a really, really gray area, and it could be a problem, but most of the time it's actually a myth, and people are not asking and shouldn't care. Yeah, I think it's a complicated answer, because we try to say to people, look, there's a life after it. If you don't serve, it's possible to have a really, really good life. You don't need the army to be successful here, or to be a good citizen, or to be a good doctor. But of course, sometimes in the society, like Noga told us also about this public image of you, but not only in the public, also in working spaces. Sometimes it could be an issue.
And also in the police, in security, in the security office, in security jobs and stuff like this, usually they would want you to have a military experience. But that's understandable, I guess.
Thank you very much. Maybe I can repeat a really interesting question, which I think came in our last session. Several people in the session we did 2 days ago asked both Noga and Jonathan if they had any kind of sense of surveillance of the organization or of themselves, and how that affects your kind of daily lives.
No, I don't know. I mean, so first of all, new profile activists and workers were arrested actually in 2008, 2009. So there was surveillance, and there was an attempt to illegalize the work of new profile because of the claim that we encouraged, or new profile encouraged youngsters to avoid the army. But it was proven after that in court and just during the investigation that it's not the case, and we're just supporting people that already decided. And of course, it's like it's also like a really sensitive line, but New Profile is really putting an effort not to cross this sensitive line. Surveillance, I mean, we don't have the proof yet, but of course, this NSO story, for us, it's clear that. And in the last year, the secret agency Shin Bet. It was clear that they're surveilling everyone. Maybe only the location in the COVID, it was made legal by the government that the Shin Bet is also surveilling citizens here, civilians. But for us, it's clear that also human rights organizations and radical left organizations are, I'm sure, part of, are under surveillance, under somehow. Interest of also security forces, but we don't have the proof, and we hope, and we don't do anything illegal, so we just continue to work. We're using, like you see, we're using Zoom, we're using WhatsApp. I think there's no way to get out of this, and we're doing our work, and we're doing legal work, so it's
Great.
Okay.
Happy to hear it.
But we are like, I do think that it restricts our work, the scope of our work, more than it does our human rights or anything, because there is like a lot of fear about another investigation, and about also if there's going to be a big mass of people that attack us, we might have difficulties handling it. So yeah.
Great. Susan, I see you raised your hand. I missed you earlier on, but would you like to ask a question aloud? Can you unmute yourself, Susan?
Yes, hi. First of all, Noga, you used the word offers when you talked about the high school seniors that got a week. They were offered a week of military experience.
Yeah.
Are they offered, or is it required?
I don't think that it's required. Like, let's say when I was in high school, all of my class went, and I thought it's weird and I didn't go, but so I could choose not to do it. But I was in like a semi-democratic high school, so maybe, I mean, it's difficult to know when you're a high school student how it's portrayed for you, whether you must or and anyway, it doesn't really matter, because peer pressure is the main thing, and if the big group of people go there and you want to be a part of it. So
yeah, something I noticed, two things. I was there in 2010 and then 2018, and the difference in the militarization at the Damascus Gate was amazing. I mean, there were two on either side of this before they go down the stairs, and then a big one right by the arched entrance. It was disgusting. One other question. What is it? Oh yeah, I saw in the West Bank that a lot of times they would just say it's a closed military area when it was someone's farm, and they just decided they wanted the people to get out. They wanted to get rid of whoever was there right then, and then they just claim it's in a military area, and they have the force of their guns to uphold it.
Yeah, I think it's also, I mean, me as an activist, an anti-occupation activist, there's a lot in the West Bank and these territories. Every demonstration or every work that we're doing there, even if it's building a playground for children, or it's helping a man or a family to build to see the, I don't know, to work in agriculture, and the army is using it. Of course, it's army, you know, it's army territory, it's army law there, and it's if a Palestinian is getting arrested, it's an army judge and a law system that is prosecuting him. So they're always doing it. They go to a judge, they're getting an order, and you're not allowed to be there anymore. And it could be a village of a Palestinian village. Yeah, I think it's also a topic that that's why we sought to take the West Bank today out, the occupied territories. I mean, all Israel is somehow occupied, but the occupied territories of the West Bank we took out because it's a whole new system to go into. But
yeah, and also our
great point. Sorry.
And also because our focus, there are many other left-wing organizations, they talk about, you know, what the military is doing in the territories, but New Profile talks about militarism within the society, which is the thing that like how it's being built over and over again within the Jewish Israeli society. So we wanted to see, because, you know, Israel's situation, it's not obvious, it's not something that should be natural, that there are all of these different borders all around and those different sections of territories, but it sort of makes sense that if there's an occupied territory or if there's a border, there's going to be military presence there, right? But in the civil space, it's not obvious. It's really weird that all of the Negev is owned by the military, and that it's in a park and it's in a, you know, next to the road. So that's what we wanted to point out.
But yeah, you are absolutely right, Susan, and I can recommend, if you would like to learn more about this specifically, we do have an online tour of the Jordan Valley led by one of our Palestinian partners, Mohammed Barakat. So that tour really focuses on that issue.
Yeah, and they're also the right people to talk about it.
Barakat was my tour guide in 2010.
Oh, great.
In fact, I spent a day with him in 2018.
Wonderful. Well, I'll say hello to him from you. That's great.
Yeah, and my sister. I mean, the two of us.
Excellent.
I love
Thanks,
that
Susan.
man. Yeah.
So, my friends, we have, I think, time for just a couple more questions. I'll ask Amelia, if you're there. Amelia from Brighton, would you like to ask a question? Maybe then one more after you. Are you there, Amelia?
Hello, can you hear me?
We can, yes. How are you?
Oh, good. Welcome to from sunny Brighton. I was going to ask if New Profile has got any connection with the group Breaking the Silence, the group of ex-military that are kind of educating people about, you know, the effect of being in the military and what their experiences have taught them of actually controlling the occupation. Because I was in Hebron about 3 years ago, and we had a tour of the city with one of their members.
Maybe I can answer that. First of all, New Profile has a good connection to all of human rights organizations. We're in good contact with everyone. I think we're doing a different work from Breaking the Silence, and we're thinking it's also important to show the actions and the work of the Israeli army in the occupied territories and in Hebron and in other places. I think for us, it's important to hear other voices and to not use the fact that people were in the army and were there to talk about the atrocities and about. I think Breaking Silence a lot of time uses this fact that, okay, I've been there. I want to explain about the occupation because I was in the army, I was part of it. And I think we try to say, we are talking about it from a civil view and from an anti-militaristic view, and we don't need to be in the army to be able and to be heard and to be legitimate, like to be a legit voice to talk against the occupation. And I need to say that we are really not focusing only on the occupation. We actually we're really looking inside the core of militarism in the Israeli society and about all other aspects of military service, and not because like you said back in the science, there's so many organizations that are looking to fight against occupation, the military occupation. We're looking a little bit more deeper into the society. But it's a great organization. It's important to have them. We don't have anything personal against them. We're just doing a little bit different work.
They're also way bigger than us. They're like way bigger, and where they have a bigger budget, like they're a big organization. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amelia. So I guess I'll kind of combine maybe a couple of questions that came that we aren't going to have time for, and then I'll ask Jay Alti if you would like to ask your question aloud. Just asked if either of you, Noga or Jonathan, have a list of recommended reading or further resources. I know that we can share in the link some different websites and share in the chat websites and emails and stuff. But if you have any other books or something you'd like to recommend, that would be great. And then JLT, if you'd like to ask your final question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd first like to say thanks to New Profile for the work they do. I think it's really important. And I wondered if they had any ideas of what more they need or how other organizations can support them, or what would make a difference in the speed of getting the message out to young people.
Oh, that's really interesting.
I think there are a few, first of all, we are already part of, and we're really looking into cooperations with other anti-militaristic voices and organizations and people. And we are already part of coalitions that are in a more global international way fighting militarism, fighting not in a militaristic way. And I think, of course, we are in Israel, we are a radical voice, and we are a silenced voice. And I think that's why we also sometimes have problems, of course, to get budgets and funding. And it's like this race of all NGOs to survive. We want to do a lot of work out there, to go out, to make screenings, to make events, to make educational programs. And of course, you need a budget for that. So it's always a help that is needed, and it's really terrible to also do this work. But yeah, it's like, I think one is to talk about it, to invite us to events, we are always happy to talk also internationally, to do cooperations with us. We can provide research and information and interesting people. But of course, the help could also be, I don't know.
Yeah. But I also think that we can say that, like, I think we're in a point that we really need to work on like community building, about like, because there are many people, like there's this myth that all of the Israeli people go to the military, while the truth is that it's less than 50%. So there is a big group of people that is not as loud as the militarist group that actually share our values. So I think that what we should be doing now, and what Jonathan and I are working on these days, is getting to know more people, getting to have more volunteers being a part of our team. And hopefully, if we actually grow as an organization, then more people will be a part of it, and we'll use our networks in order to reach more people. And it's like tilting it that way. I think that's strategically, that's my answer for that question. So yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very much to everybody who joined us. Thank you so much to Noga. Thank you so much to Jonathan for your contributions. But we are pretty much out of time for today's event. But again, this is not necessarily the end. If you'd like to join Green Olive for future events, we have many different online tours that are available on our website. You can also see recordings of previous special events on our YouTube channel. We're also going to be uploading this session to our YouTube channel very soon. If you subscribe to the Green Olive channel, you'll be notified as soon as that video is ready. If you want to talk more about these issues, either with me or the folks at New Profile, you can definitely do that. You have my email address. I can see Jonathan has just pasted his email address in the chat. Thanks for that. Noga maybe will do the same, I think. And yeah, let me finish by saying I hope you have a wonderful day wherever in the world you are. thank you once again very much for joining. And if you do want to leave a contribution, whatever you felt today's tour was worth, we really do thank you for that, because this is the only way we're making a living right now. For those of you who aren't able to see the chat, you can contribute at a very simple URL, contributions.greenolivetours.com. I'll leave the final words for Jonathan and Noga to say goodbye. But for me, thank you very much, everybody, and hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, I think we work on our website. So in the coming months, there will be a website with all the information, with research, documents, with a lot of videos. So we can also send it somehow maybe through Alex, or just send me or Noga an email, and we will be in touch and update you about our website. And if you want some information and you have specific ideas of what, we can also send it by mail and share it with you, like the question that you asked me before, Alex. And thank you for being interested in this topic. It's not taken for granted. And thank you for being here. And thank you for the opportunity, Alex, and for the great work.
Thank you so much. It was really, really nice to meet you and to have this event today. So yeah, we'll be happy to be in touch if you're interested.
Great. Thank you again. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day.